Okay, good day, and thanks for zooming in to our panel today, which is on Self and Society, the Memoir of Political Witness. I'm Marc Nieson, and I'm joined today by Glen Retief and Khoi. All right, I'll give some quick bios here. Glen Retief grew up in South Africa and is a social justice activist. His memoir, The Jack Bank, Memoir of South African Childhood, won a Lambda Literary Award and the Africa Book Club selection. He teaches at Susquehanna University and is presently a Fulbright Scholar in Mamelodi, South Africa. Khoi is a Vietnamese artist and activist who fuses free jazz, ethnic Vietnamese music, and bold autobiographical political storytelling. She's a pop star and has also been awarded the Václav Havel International Prize for Creative Dissent. She's currently living in exile in the United States, an Artist Protection Fund Fellow under the University of Pittsburgh, and is hosted by the City of Asylum Pittsburgh's Exiled Writer Residency Program. So to start, I thought I'd say that it seems to me that for memoir to speak with any kind of relevance, it needs to reach beyond sort of the belly button lint of the self, beyond, say, diaries or journals, the memoir, if you will, to say something more communal. So I was looking up in the dictionary for the actual definitions for memoir, and I'll read you what the listings were. It had 4. It's 1, an official note or report. 2, a narrative composed from personal experience. 3, an account of something noteworthy. And then the plural form of it is listed as a record of the proceedings of a learned society. So that within the definition of self, actually society was kind of implied here. So going beyond definitions, we may come back to them again. I want to first begin by sort of asking, did your work actually start off as political, either in context or in the nature of what you were doing? Or maybe even say what specifically first motivated you to start, quote unquote, witnessing? Glen, you want to start off?
Can I begin?
Yeah.
Okay. Well, I guess the first thing I'd like to say is that I think that my love of writing is something that feels just integral to my being, and I don't want to say sort of independent. You know, it's its own thing. So I think I would love language. All my life I've loved language. I've loved words. I've loved reading. I've loved sentences. I've loved descriptions, and that to me feels very fundamental. I can barely remember a time I didn't. When I was very young, I would run to my maternal grandmother and say, "Please read to me, read to me." And I was always the instigator of sort of story time. So, and you know, when I was in elementary school, I would ride my bicycle in Kruger National Park, South Africa, which is where I grew up. I would ride my bicycle into primary school and then just write stories in the early mornings, just for the pleasure of it. And that I wouldn't call political. These were stories of marabou stalks, you know, getting caught in air currents and being whirled around the world. And there were stories of sort of fairies and magic and fantasy and imagination. So you know, so I would say that there is a foundation here that is maybe not apolitical, but it's pre-political. I wouldn't call it political. But then, you know, there's a big but that follows right after that, which is that from almost as early as this, I can't really conceive, or it's hard for me to imagine a sort of an individuality or a self that is separate from politics or separate from society, because at the same time as I was cycling in to elementary school to write those stories in little books with colorful covers, I was also being required to patrol that elementary school in Kruger National Park. Kruger National Park is sort of like Yellowstone. It's the big wilderness area, the big national park in South Africa. But I was every couple of days, it would be my turn to patrol in the early mornings during school assembly and to keep a lookout for ANC, African National Congress, terrorists or guerrilla fighters. I would call them guerrilla fighters today. At the time, we called them terrorists. And this was, African National Congress was, of course, Nelson Mandela's movement fighting against apartheid, racism, autocracy, anti-democratic, the racist dictatorship in South Africa. So I had a whistle around my neck, and I was looking under tables, and I was looking on, I was looking anywhere where there could be magnetic attraction, and I was looking for limpet mines, landmines. I was looking out into the bush, into the savannah to try to see, movements of guerrilla fighters, and then I had my whistle to blow on. I'm not sure that would have been an effective sort of military response to an attack on our elementary school. And of course, although I didn't know it at the time, but the African National Congress was not interested in attacking elementary schools. They were interested in attacking power, police stations, military targets, infrastructure targets. But the propaganda at school was that we had to be afraid of the African National Congress. And so, Milan Kundera has this, I think, wonderful formulation about history falling on you, or history kind of just landing on the individual. And I think from almost as old as I can remember, language and storytelling and writing mattering to me. Politics mattered to me as well. And it couldn't not. It was just a part of my life in an absolutely inevitable way, and there was no evading it. And so to me, in my current process as a writer, and in my career as a writer, really all along since I've had an identity as a writer, and I've made this a serious part of my life, witnessing political writing has felt inseparable to me from the act of writing and the act of storytelling. That doesn't mean that, as I say, it doesn't mean that I write for political reasons or that I write to witness. It just is that I love writing, and that witnessing is sort of inevitable for me. It's my material, it's my preoccupations, it's my life. I don't really know what else to write about. This is just so important to me. So so it feels like a false separation, the sort of like literature for its own sake, or writing for its own sake, and then politics for its own sake. It just feels inevitable because of who I am, because I love writing, and because politics sort of landed on me. Those two things just got me where I am.
Yeah, and
Yes, the same here. Well, I feel the same way of Glen, because I'm not writing a book, but I'm writing songs, and I'm writing lyrics for my songs, and I just write about what I feel, what I see, what happening in my life, in the society that I'm living with. And yeah, but I like the term like political of witness. Like I like that term. Like we don't want, or we want, it doesn't matter. When we live through the time that we involved in activism, we are the political witness. We are kind of that thing. And it's good that we have something to write down. It's good that we have something to tell. I think apart from history and societies, some memoir or political of witness can help the people understand the past, understand the history in another glance. Yeah, and I think it's important. It's very important.
There was certainly a period when, I mean, currently you're sort of touring a performance called Bad Activist, right?
Yes.
And at some point, surely your work sort of shifted into this being more of a foreground of what your stories are about or what you're singing about. It's sort of, that's why I was asking about how it extends from like this self and your own little life and what's going on difficult for you. And somehow it starts to say, oh, look, I need to say this and speak out, not just speak from. Is there something in particular you remember that sort of turned that corner for you, Mai?
Yes, I can say that I am a witness of the Vietnamese election process. Because when I nominated myself for the National Assembly election in 2016, I have two aims. First, encourage people to participate in politics, raise awareness for people about their right to participate in politics. And the second aim is I want to witness the process of the election, which is non-transparency, unfairly. And yeah, I have all of the documents and I documentary about that process. So yeah, it's a part of my story. I tell in Bad Activist performance. And yeah, every time I perform Bad Activist or I rewrite the script, it's like I live my life for one more time. It's like I spend all of the emotional journey again and again, and it's very important to me because I can deeply get through. I can deeply look back about what I've been through.
And is it equally as
I love your
draining?
title, by the way. I love the title. I love the name Bad Activist. It reminds me of Roxane Gay's Bad Feminist.
Right.
So it's just great.
Thank you.
And just like with that other book, I don't believe you're really a bad activist.
I'm a bad activist, but at least I'm an activist. So my care about society will be deeper. Yeah.
Nice. For those of you who are observant, you've noticed we've been joined by Marjorie Agosin. I'll introduce her in a moment when she comes back to the spot.
Sorry, I was late. I couldn't get the Zoom, and I'm just kind of starting the day. So nice to be with all of you. So
well, how about I give you a moment to settle, and I'll introduce you and all your wonderful.
And if you could rephrase the question. Yeah.
Initial question, you bet.
Yeah.
Okay. For all of us out there, we're lucky to have been joined by Marjorie Agosin, who's a Chilean American whose writings span poetry, prose, and literary criticism. Her three memoirs revolve around her Jewish family seeking a home in Latin American society, exploring questions of migration, identity, and ethnicity. She's an activist for women's rights in Chile. She's been honored by the United Nations for her human rights work, and the Chilean government itself finally awarded her the Gabriel Mistral Medal of Honor for Life Achievement. We had started out, Marjorie, I had read actual dictionary definitions of memoir. And I guess what our first question sort of jumped into was thinking about, did your work initially start out as quote unquote political in terms of its context or its nature? Or what specifically maybe motivated you to start witnessing wider than your own belly button, if we can?
Okay, so thank you. I'm very glad to to join Marc and all of you. And I believe that I first started as a poet. And I think all poets witness the world around them, whether to speak about a falling leaf, the transition from summer to autumn. And I learned as a poet to pay attention to the world around me. And then it was important not to witness growing up. I don't want to say specifically growing up in Latin America, because injustice is a universal. But growing up and going to the markets with my mother and seeing it, what really impressed me, so many people without teeth and poor health, and women that they were in their 40s and looked like they were in their 80s. And the dwellings in the shanty towns. So it was a process of paying attention to the world. And many people don't pay attention to the world around them. And what you mentioned, Marc, I started as a poet, then I became an exile with my family. And then I kind of tried to recreate the country that I lost, what I left behind. And then years later, I was speaking with my mother, I started thinking, what was it like to be a minority in Chile? A Jewish minority that is 1% of the population. And I'm going to say something, I'm too old to worry about what's politically correct or not. But unfortunately, Jews have never been seen as minorities. On the contrary, they have been seen as the aggressors, the managers of the wealth of the world. But growing up in a Catholic country where Jews were accused of murdering Jesus, it was not easy. So I slowly began to recreate my parents' lives, and eventually through writing my own life. And John, can you get me water, please? Mm-hmm. So I was thinking, my activism is really through writing and through uncovering and through reclaiming what happened to a population that went unnoticed. In this case, the Jewish minorities of the country. I don't want to take my time. I could talk about this forever, but if you have comments or thoughts.
Yeah.
I'm just observing. I'm observing how much commonality there has been in our responses. I think all three of us have said the same thing, which is basically, this is inevitable. We've used different language for it. Marjorie, you talked about it's inevitable in the act of observation. That as a poet, if you observe society, you're going to become political because it's out there. And then I was just talking about this feeling as a child that there was no escaping. There was no escaping injustice. I lived in one of the most unjust societies on earth, and it was all around me. And there was just, if I wanted to talk about my life, I was going to talk about injustice because it's right there. And then you were saying the same thing, just that running for the national legislature in Vietnam, it landed on you. So I think I just wanted to observe that that's a commonality between all three of us. It's not as though we decided on a certain day, okay, I think it's time for me to be political. It's that, it's that for all three of us, it felt inevitable and just, it's just what we did.
Yeah, I want to touch one more, Glen, in particular. In your memoir, you end up talking about this sort of bullying and savagery that you experienced in boarding school, where you were living in Kruger National Park. And I mean, when you initially started writing that, I'm sort of trying to figure out is, are we sort of expressing that personally, or like when in that process or immediately in the process of writing, did you realize, oh, this is reflective of the larger, huger, national, institutional kind of savagery that's going on?
So I love that question. I'll often say that I don't think I would have been interested in sharing those traumatic experiences of boarding school with a reading public if I hadn't realized that it was political. I think it wasn't fun to write about. I think if I was just going by what's fun on the page or what's fun at my desk, I think I would have picked other things. That, writing about Kruger Park, for example, is glorious fun. Writing about the beauty of nature and just all the animals and birds that were there, and then the baboons breaking into my aunt and uncle's house and wrecking the house, and then what did my aunt and uncle write on the insurance forms? These are the home insurance forms. These are wonderfully fun sort of stories, and very enjoyable for me to write, very enjoyable for me to relive, and very enjoyable for me to share. But I did, I think that, and this connects maybe with everybody else on the panel. I'll be interested to know, Maya or Marjorie, if you have sort of parallel experiences to this. But both when I lived in South Africa when I was younger, and also being back now, what is extraordinary to me is that my boarding school experiences of being so intensely bullied, and just lots and lots of beatings, and sort of this hazing that in a bizarre way sort of mirrored the racial, class, and other oppressions of the society, where we were ordered around like black servants, frankly. That was a sort of the model for the bullying and the hazing that I experienced in boarding school. And for me, it was just normal. This was just school. This is what people experienced when they went to school. And you experience more of it if you went to boarding school, sure, as opposed to being a day scholar and living with your parents. And you experienced still more of it if you were perceived as different in some way. I was perceived as gay and a little bit effeminate. So I was perceived as different, and therefore became more of a target. But no, every single person that I knew, every single South African, particularly white South African, had been bullied like this. Like this was just growing up. And so, so I don't think I felt a particular need to share it with readers. But then when I did move to the United States and I would tell these stories, I would say, well, this is what school was like for me. What was school like for you? And when I would sort of say, beatings with cricket bats, being ordered around, like little electrical torture, that kind of thing. What was it like for you at middle school? Like, the middle school was bad, but it wasn't bad, So there was a sort of a shock, and then that led. It was not just Americans. This was Swiss, Brazilians, other developing countries also. Like I had Brazilian friends in New York. They didn't experience anything like this. So then that got the sort of my brain sort of working a little bit. So so what was it? If this was so different from people's experiences in so many different countries, why? What made it different? And that's when I started to make connections to the Russian hazing system. And I forget the Russian word, but there's a word for the kind of military hazing that is very totalitarian, that was very totalitarian in the Soviet Union, and that still exists today. And and then I started to read more about how in authoritarian and totalitarian societies, there's often this very violent hazing. Mario Vargas Llosa writes about this in Time of the Hero in Peru. So started to make connections to other sort of very militarized societies. And that's, and then that's when I felt that I had a story that was worth sharing, is that it wasn't just trauma. If it was just trauma, I would take it to a therapist. But it was, it was a political story with resonance for the world. And that's when I thought it might be interesting for other people. I would maybe write that story, like I say, in therapy, just to sort of heal myself or something. But I wouldn't want to publish it, I think, unless I thought it had political implications. So it was moving to New York City that made me realize, okay, this is sort of a bit of a unique story, and that made me reflect on the sort of social aspects of that.
Great. Anybody want to pick up on that?
I'd like to thank you for what you're sharing with us. And it's so important that you have shared it with the world, not just like a personal trauma, but in my 3 political memoirs, I write a little bit about being bullied. And one very interesting incident, when we went to a British school, every time at recess, they made a circle, like a ronda, lullaby, and they put my sister and I in the middle, and they sang an old medieval song, "Who stole the bread from the ovens? The Jewish dogs, the Jewish dogs." We couldn't comprehend what was happening, and as young girls, we thought we were not dogs, that we were people. And we talked to my parents about it, and we brought this case to the principal of the school, and she dismissed it as a child's game. And this is especially now in the 2020, the year of 2021, which is, we are reckoning with so much injustice in the world. What I really learned was that complicity is the most dangerous, and the children were ignorant and probably learn all this from their parents. But the way that the adult world treated the situation was unfathomable. Ever since that incident, we were sent to a Jewish Hebrew school where I really could be free. And my father said something that it rings very truthful now. We are sending you to this school so that you will learn how to defend yourselves. And I think that the necessity to speak is a fundamental for every single citizen. And bullying happens in so many forms. This was the children, but then the Chilean children. But then when I came to America, I was bullied because I had an accent. And then in my adult years, I was bullied because I am too creative and too prolific as a writer. So I've always been bullied. But what I do is I fight back. We have to fight. And we don't have to necessarily fight with anger, but we have to fight with truth and with good writing. And I think bullying is also endemic to the world. If you are a girl, adolescent girl, overweight, you're bullied. If you're a person of color, you're bullied. If you have different sexual preference, you're bullied. It doesn't stop. So this is what I've learned, how to combat this in a positive way without becoming them. Yeah.
Without becoming what? Dead or den?
Them. Well, dead and them, probably. Them.
Yeah.
And the ultimate bully in the world is Donald Trump. And he continues to be very popular. That's something to really think about.
Well, we could segue so many places on that one, but
Yeah.
I'm wondering, what is interesting is that all of us are somehow living in the United States. I've been fortunate in that I've been able to visit each one of your original countries, and I feel very, very lucky for that. But it seems to me that, I mean, injustice is injustice, as you say. It's common everywhere. But you are coming from different cultures, and I'm wondering if memoir, does it mean different things from your culture? I mean, some cultures, the idea of standing out, and you're in the United States where it's like me is the most important thing in the world, and that's not necessarily the case in other cultures. So the idea of speaking out, is that, I don't know, I'll ask the general question about what does memoir mean in different cultures, or speaking from your own at least. Khoi, do you want to start on that?
Yes. In my culture, normally everyone wants to hide their story, and they don't tell the truth because we live in under the pressure by the government for so long. And we really, I mean, suppression by the government for so long. So we very scared to speak out. So if someone do a memoir about political witness, it could be the most dangerous for them. So that's why the government hates me. That's why they put me in troubles. And they try to isolate me to my community and my people. So in my culture, people very scared to receive or react to a memoir or political witness.
Yeah, right.
They're so scared.
Yeah, no doubt, no doubt.
But I am still doing it because I think I can encourage more people to step out of the fear and become activists or become more contribute, like they could do their own way to contribute for the change, for the good change. Yeah, I think keep telling your own story will inspire many people, young people especially.
Right. Anyone else want to speak to that question about memoir in your respective cultures?
I think memoirs are becoming more known in South Africa, or more popular as a label. I think we have some leading writers like Zexumda who are based in the United States, and so I think that the memoir boom of North America has sort of influenced South Africa. And then there are some quite famous memoirs of witness that have been quite important. And again, sort of ambiguous. I think not everybody loves them, but I think of memoirs like Leomalans, My Traitor's Heart, that have been very successful internationally. So so I think that the concept of memoir is around in South Africa now more than before. But for a long time there was, the same was true internationally. I would say that maybe South Africa kind of lagged the United States in the kind of the embrace of creative nonfiction, or the embrace of memoir as a term. So so you have very, very autobiographical novels like Sol Plaatje's Moody, one of the first novels by a Black South African, but that it draws so heavily on autobiography. For a long time, that was sort of where it was at, was the autobiographical novel that was that really was a book of witness, and very important, often very important political works that had a strong impact on the real world, and that were referenced real events. So a lot of literal testimony involved in them. I think there's it is. I would say South Africa, these sweeping generalizations, anytime you make a generalization, you can think of a million exceptions, but in general, I think less individualistic, more sort of communally oriented cultures. South African cultures tend to be more oriented towards the communal rather than the individual, and so therefore, I think that there's the things that worry any memoirist about writing memoir, which is the sort of like, as an individual, I'm going to speak out and I'm going to speak about real people, and I'm going to expose them, and violate their privacy potentially. I think these worries are magnified when you're in a less individualistic culture. You worry more about the impact on your community, because community and family are that much more important relative to more individualistic cultures. So I do think, memoir is kind of troubled here in South Africa more than in the States. But on the flip side, I think it's also respected and particularly the memoir of witness, which I would call Zexam does, sometimes there is a void, Biomalan, my traitor's heart, James could see a boyhood. I would call all of these sort of memoirs of witness. So they also, they're also paradoxically in a way more respected because, because of their ambition in looking both outwards as well as inwards. So it's mixed.
Right. Marjorie, any thoughts on that?
Yes, I was, thank you for both of your comments. I was thinking that all cultures, like especially where we come from, have suffered political repression. And that fear is always there that somebody will come and get us or arrest us. It's like almost in our DNA. So I think that a lot of political memoir is almost at the crossing of fear, but the daringness to move forward and to speak the truth. But by definition, memoir is very individualistic, but like you were saying, coming from South Africa, me coming from Chile, we are much more, as writers, we are much more concerned with the collective and with understanding particular moments of history. The genre of memoir in Chile is let's say Neruda wrote an autobiography in verse, that's kind of a memoir, but it's kind of a genre that has developed later on in the literary history of Chile. And I think that a lot of the writers center around the time of the dictatorship. And there are very, very beautiful memoirs that have emerged, especially of women being together in concentration camps and how this experience shaped their own life stories and their own narratives. So it's very different perhaps than the American memoir that were, I think that people have always assumed that they were free in this country. Now they are rethinking this. But our memoir really deals with particular historical moments of fascism. That's what I think we write memoirs to combat the fascism that we have witnessed.
Yeah, absolutely. Do you feel, I want to think about the sort of the form of the memoir. Have you ever felt that you've bumped into certain constraints, sort of, let's say, fact, in terms of fact or ethics or any of these things that have sort of impacted on your creative decisions in how you're writing your work or structuring it? Have you ever maybe had to cross a line to serve your narrative or your cause?
It was such a huge fear of mine when I wrote the Jack Bank, and it still is, maybe a less so. The Jack Bank, because it was a childhood memoir, and memory is so unreliable. The sort of the more political nonfiction work that I'm doing now is researched, and it's interviews, it's literary journalism, it's immersion. So I have my notebook with me in a way I didn't when I was a kid. I can record things on my cell phone. So I feel on more solid ground. I was sort of terrified that I would get something badly wrong through memory, and that then it would discredit the political witness. This was a tremendous fear of mine, that if I somehow had, I'd had a nightmare about some bullying in boarding school, and then this only happened in my dream, but now I think it really happened. It's a memory, so I write it as a memory, but really it was just a dream. And then suddenly, then somebody disproves the scene in my memoir somehow, and then it's like, okay, this bullying thing, it didn't really happen, or it didn't happen in the way that he said. He's exaggerating, and then and then the whole book or the whole testimony gets discredited because of the unreliability of memory. So that was a sort of a fear of mine and a dilemma. And then, of course, what I realized after the book was published is that nobody remembers accurately, so the person who says it didn't happen, their memory is as reliable as mine. It's like we're all just unreliable together. Nobody can be sure. So that did sort of raise some issues for me about sort of the formal constraints or the strategy that I was going to use. It was very important to me to give readers a kind of a visceral and emotional sense of what it was like to experience what I was writing about. To me, that was important to the kind of writing that I like. I like the very cinematic style of writing. So, you know, it was a matter of sort of writing taste. And then it was also a matter of, like, you know, politically, I wanted readers to be immersed in what I was writing about so that they would be able to understand it and respond to it and be moved politically in whichever way they were going to be moved. But that, you know, but making it come alive on the page was important for me for all of those reasons. So the way I solved it was I just, I gave myself permission to just to imagine or dramatize the past in what I called my best guess. This is what I think happened. This is what's likeliest. This is what I've always believed happened. And then I had my author's notes just saying, sort of disclaimer, you know, I fact-checked this as best as I could. Memory is unreliable. You know, probably there are errors in this, but, you know, this is the way I remember it. So, you know, and then I sort of feel, I was comfortable with that as a compromise. Many, you know, there are obviously, as I think all of us here know, that memoirists of political witness have done everything from sort of combining, like Rigoberta Menchú, combining sort of different people's experiences and memories all in one person. You know, they've done everything from that to being very, very careful and rigorous, like Ishmael Bayer's A Long Way Gone, you know, where it's almost, that book almost reads like a court affidavit. It's so careful. It's like, I am sure this happened because of this. And it, you know, and that book almost reminded me of sort of an Amnesty International kind of court testimony or something. It was, you know, the witness was much more important than the sort of bringing it to life in a scene, or, you know, or allowing the imagination to play free with the political content. So I think people just solve this in different ways, and there's no right way of doing it. There are pros and cons to every strategy.
I have different challenges when I do my kind of memoir, right? My Bad Activist is autobiographical musical performance, but it's kind of the memoir. And my challenges is how to make the timeline that match with what happened in my life, which is everyone knew about me already. For example, my friend, when he watched Bad Activist, he confused that, this song you wrote after you protest Trump and get evicted from your house in Hanoi, but why the video was filmed here in Pittsburgh? So the big challenges for me to do this kind of work is how to make it more authentic, not just telling the events that happened in my life. And yes, I'm still developing my piece, my performance, Bad Activist, and I think that was the big challenge for me when I do this kind of thing.
Marjorie, you've obviously worked in different in poetry and prose in dealing with same material. Anything about the structure of the form that certain things have allowed you to do?
Yeah, so interesting to hear you both. I think that maybe not us as authors, but the reader always wants accuracy.
Yes.
And there's no such thing as accuracy when you are trying to remember. And you said the best, we think this is what happened, but the beauty of, let's say, writing a lyrical memoir that is also political, that is so porous. And I think American readers have problem with ambiguity, but good writing is ambiguous. So the idea of a memoir and kind of imagining how we retell the story is as valid as we concentrate on factual information. But for me, a political memoir is not necessarily about truth telling, but it's how the individual perceives that truth. Because even though truth has an important objectivity, when you're recollecting things that happened to you that touch you deeply or hurt you deeply, it's a voice of the teller that is speaking. And I remember that particular incident. My mother told me that in the German school in her town in south of Chile, maybe Marc, you were there, I don't know, there's a German flag and a Nazi flag. And she always told me that she walked by that school. And when I wrote that in my memoir, A Cross and a Star, they disputed me. They told me that I was lying. And I said, finally, well, was my mother telling me the truth or did she imagine it? Till finally, I found a Canadian historian that sent me the pictures of the German and the Nazi flag. So my mother was right, and all the other people did not want to buy that argument that Chile had in their public schools and in their private schools a Nazi flag. So, but to me, one interesting thing that happened to me is that when I wrote about the story of my mother in A Cross and a Star, you were mentioning this one, I crossed boundaries. I became my mother. I became her voice. And I didn't say, oh, I'm going to become my mother and speak like her. It just happened. So a memory is it's like a weaving or it's an embroidery. It's so interwoven with, let's say, the voices of our hearts and the voices of our nations and the voices of the world. But ultimately, a memoirist should be true to himself or herself. That's how I feel.
Right. Okay, I'm going to use this as a segue. I'd like to come back to ask everyone more or less, what do you feel most compelled to speak about at this juncture? I mean, this is nonfiction now, and so the now is certainly different than it was last year, right? The whole fact that we're just doing this via Zoom is self-evident. First, I'd like to set up a segue, at least here, for Khoi to maybe share one of her songs with us and a little bit of a context for it.
Yes, I would love to.
Oh, thank you so much.
I love to sing always. I think I'm better singing than talking. Yeah, so I would love to sing you all one of the songs that I have it in my bad activist performance. The song's called Re-Education Camp. So here the song I wrote is about, not about the re-education camp system, but I wrote this song to criticize the whole system who created the re-education camp to harm people. This is my guitar. And in Bad Activist, I tell the story about my father was in re-education camp for 1 year after the war, after the Vietnam and America War. They still ban love songs and everything about American culture will be banned. And my father were wearing the bell-bottom pants, and the police catch him on the street and sent him to the re-education camp. Right now, they use re-education camp for another purpose. not. Yes, but still a place that harm people, torture people's mental and brainwash people. Không cần vào trong đó, chỉ có các người, những người nghĩ ra trại phục hồi nhân phẩm mới cần vào trong đó ngồi. Vào trong đó ngồi, các ngươi sẽ có thời gian để suy nghĩ, các ngươi sẽ có thời gian để ăn năn, để hối hận, để tự tát vào mặt vì đã quá tàn ác, vì đã không biết sự thật, vì đã lừa dối cả một dân tộc, vì đã dùng chính sách ngu dân để cai trị, vì đã cô ấy không cần vào trong đó ngồi, chỉ có các người, những người nghĩ ra trại phục hồi nhân phẩm mới cần vào trong đó ngồi. That's it.
Wow.
Thank you.
Oh, come on. Right. Khoi, I know you have to run now. Thank you so much for offering your insights and sharing your artistry. I think we have a couple more moments where maybe Marjorie and Glen can say something about, you know, where they are now, what they feel they need to speak out about most at this juncture.
Yes, I have to run to another meeting. So very pleasure to talk with you all today. And I wish we can do it again in another time. I love to share everything I know, everything I've been, and I love to hear your own story as well.
Thank you.
Thank you very much for having
so
me
much.
in this
Yeah.
panel.
I'm going to see if I can get the link for Bad Activists for them to share that.
Oh yes, please.
Which
You can watch Bad Activist in City of Asylum website. Yeah, just search Bad Activist, and you will see the link to watch online.
Yeah, which also has, they've also subtitled it, so that's really wonderful for folks who want to learn more about lyrics.
Thank you.
Thank you again. Come on.
Thank you.
Come on.
Bye.
Bye.
Any last closing words about, you know, what you feel most crucial to be doing, and even if you feel like you're like writing feels like enough of an action even at this juncture?
Well, I think there's so many things, you know, there's rising authoritarianism in the world. Marjorie mentioned Donald Trump, but there's also Bolsonaro, there's Duterte, there's so many, it's happening all over the world. There's definitely the pandemic and the intense suffering that it's inflicted. We did have, at Susquehanna University, we had the honor of having Aminata Forna as a visiting author for a week recently, and somebody asked her this question. Actually, they asked her a slightly different question, but I think, you know, I think it, for me, it ends up being the same question. The question they asked her is, what do you think future generations are going to want us to have written about? And she said, climate change. That is going to be climate change, climate change, climate change, climate change, climate change, and climate change. You know, that's going to be what, when people look back on this era, they're going to say, you know, what did you say about climate change? What didn't you say, and why didn't you say more? So I think that is, and I find it very hard to write about climate change. It's hard to get my head around it without descending into either sort of some kind of a denial or doom and gloom. It's a very difficult subject for me to write about, but that I feel is, you know, that's the greatest crisis of the moment for me personally, and all the others seem to be kind of connected to that. So.
Marjorie, any thoughts?
Yeah, I think that, Glenn, what you said makes me think about that. It's a beautiful question. Why did the new generations will want us to write? But I am interested in how the interconnectedness of the world is all about, how trees are connected to one another and how we are connected to one another, we, the world. And I am an optimist because I think that optimism, it's not that you're a fool, but it allows you to move forward. And I would like for people now and future generations understand how this pandemic has unveiled us, made us naked to the great truths of climate change, inequity, injustice, violence. And but if we are not going to speak about the interconnectedness, then the world will continue to be as separate entities of privilege. And I do feel lately I've written 2 young adult novels, and I'm very interested in writing for the youth. And I'm also interested in writing about the resilience of young people, those across the borders, the undocumented, the unaccompanied. And I want to record that history for future generations to know. So I want to write for the young, and that's writing for the future.
Yeah, absolutely. I feel the same way lately. The world doesn't need another novel right now, but it certainly needs for the youth to have some understanding and movement. I thank you all so much for taking the time out, for sharing your thoughts, your wisdoms. Our hopes, I think, are that we can, it's not self or society, it is self end society. And it's even beyond society, as you say. The threats that are out there are global. And it's a way we have to really start thinking. I think we'll close now. I thank all of you out there for Zooming in also. I know you have a lot of different choices of what to look at online. And I'm wishing you all the best in your own good words and good works for the future, which we're all pushing for. Thanks again for tuning in.
Thank you, Mark. Nice to meet you,
Thank you,
Glen.
Mark.
Pleasure.
Nice to meet you,
A
Marjorie.
pleasure.
Keep
Yeah.
in touch.
Bye.